This card is insanely complicated, and I almost felt like just becoming a judge for how many rules and referendums I had to go through just to figure out what I can do to break this card. But in the end, I do think we can bring some order to this card. Today we have Obeka, Brute Chronologist. For 1 blue, black, red, you can get a 3/4 legendary creature ogre wizard with tap. The player whose turn it is may end the turn. Exile all spells and abilities from the stack. The player whose turn it is discards down to their maximum hand size, damage wears off, and this turn and until end of turn effects end. This card is an extremely niche and interesting commander, and especially at its price, it's extremely affordable. Now, you can't end somebody's turn before they want it to end, but that's not going to be a problem. They're not going to be able to take advantage of the fact that you can end the turn on your terms, as long as it is your turn. Obeka is a very interesting commander because Obeka can allow us to get rid of some effects that will get rid of creatures that we wanted to keep onto the battlefield. This deck focuses a lot on things that say at end of turn or at the beginning of the next end step. The way this deck works is going to be interesting because not a lot of people would see this deck run in a normal game of Commander, if at all. So Obeka is the type of commander that will need to be on your field before you start letting any amount of gameplay go through. But when you do have her, what you would want to do is let effects that say either at end of turn or at end of combat trigger, and then exile them before they get off of the stack. So the way we can do that is to have Obeka untapped, and then when they hit that trigger, you just end the turn. So say for example we have Myriad. Now Myriad is another interesting ability that says whenever this creature attacks, for each opponent other than the defending player, you may put a token that's a copy of this creature onto the battlefield tapped and attacking that player, or planeswalker he or she controls. Exile the tokens at end of combat. So for this card, Banshee of the Dread Choir, which you pay 3 black black for a 4/4 creature spirit, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card. Say you're attacking a player, and they're not going to be able to kill it with the original. So you attack them with the original, and then the other 3 copies are attacking another opponent. If any of them get through, they're going to cause that player to discard a card. Normally, this is a good ability, and it would go away at end of combat, so you just have the 1 creature, and then next combat you swing back in. Pretty fair, pretty balanced. What our commander allows us to do is take advantage of the fact that it says, exile the tokens at end of combat. This is the first time I've had to go into rules in this channel, so let's talk about this. A triggered ability is something that goes on the stack that usually says whenever, or when, or at. So at the beginning of the next end step, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, those are all triggered abilities. This is at end of combat. When you make a token that has that stipulation attached to it, it's where it gets a little tricky, so you gotta kind of follow me here. That will trigger once, and then it will never trigger again. So this token will check once that it's going to end of combat, and then once that trigger goes on the stack and it resolves, it will be exiled. But if we were to have that trigger go on the stack and then exile that stack, well, this never happened, and now your creature stays. So instead of you only having 3 tokens that go away at end of combat, you have 3 tokens that can swing next turn, and since this creature has Myriad printed on the base, those tokens will make 3 more tokens each. This can get extremely out of hand for your opponents. For you, you're going to be doing just fine. If you're not careful and you don't activate Obeka at the end of combat, it will still check for the next time combat ends. So what your tokens will do will last the end step and then go to the next player's turn, and then when their combat is over, they'll exile. Unless you can tap Obeka and ask really nicely for them to end the turn. Odds are they're not gonna. Hey, I know that I have 500 creatures on the board right now, and you're the last player alive, but I accidentally ended my turn before the end of combat trigger happened. So I know you're about to go to end of combat, but with the exile trigger on the stack, would you like to end the turn? Okay. Wait. Yeah? What? Is that a problem? No? Yeah, no, I think I'll end the turn.
Alright, thanks, man. I guess I'll just take
problem.
the turn then. I'll untap.
Your
Response to your upkeep, I'm going to wipe the board.
Now, this deck has a lot of things in it that can allow us to get value from our own deck by multiplying Myriad triggers or something of the like. But Firebolt Flutists is another part of this deck that I really like. When it enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature you don't control until end of turn. Untap it. It gains haste and Myriad until end of turn. You are paying 4 red for a 4/4 creature giant bard in this case. So don't think that it's going to be anything but like a 1-turn thing, because we're not in green, so you're just not going to be able to cast everything you want all the time. So this will take a turn, but the most impactful creature on the board, especially if it's a non-legendary creature, you can then get 3 of. This will give the creature back, because it doesn't say give it back at end of turn, it says until end of turn. And again, by reading Obeka, it says until end of turn effects end. So that effect would end. But it is important to know that you would still get those 3 copies and have 3 copies of a creature that they only had 1 of. Or we can get things like Identity Thief. 2 blue, you can get a 0/3 creature Shapeshifter, and whenever Identity Thief attacks, you may exile another target non-token creature, and if you do, Identity Thief becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. Return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This one's really, really fun, because it usually would mean, oh, it's going to become that until end of turn, and then the creature goes back. No, this is targeted removal. You get to get rid of something on the board, and it doesn't come back when this thing goes away. At the beginning of the next end step, you will wait until that end step trigger, and then that thing just kind of stays in exile. So you can get rid of some pretty important threats, swing in with a pseudo version of it, and keep them off the battlefield. People will not like to see this card, because once they understand what your deck does, they don't want to see this coming at them. We can also use Felden of the Third Path. For 1 red, you get a 2/3 legendary creature Human Artificer with 2 red, tap, create a token that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. This is obviously going to be really helpful for us, because if anything gets completely removed, especially those Myriad creatures, we can bring them back, use them again, put them back onto the battlefield, create more token copies of them, and keep everything. We might not be able to keep the original if we don't have a good way of getting that end step trigger, but that's not a problem, because all we have to do is keep those token copies, and then we'll keep gaining value off of those. We can also get Zara Renegade Recruiter. For 3 blue-red, we get a 4/3 legendary creature Human Pirate with flying, and whenever Zara Renegade Recruiter attacks, look at defending player's hand. You may put a creature card from it onto the battlefield under your control tapped and attacking that player or planeswalker they control. Return that creature to the owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. Now here's where it becomes really broken, is that we don't have to give that back no more. It's ours forever. This is not a fun color set for your opponents, because we are going to take and we are not going to ask permission. Zara Renegade Recruiter becomes broken and busted because you can take the biggest threats out of your opponent's hands and just play them. And it can either be to make that inopportune play for your opponent, or it can be because they're just holding on to massive value. And if they can't cast it at that time and you can steal it, you might as well. And then you're going to win the game, and everybody's going to love you. We could also take advantage of things like Alchemist's Gambit. For 1 red, it's a sorcery with cleave for blue, red. Don't worry about what the cleave thing does, because it says take an extra turn after this one. During that turn, damage can't be prevented. And in brackets, at the beginning of that turn's end step, you lose the game. Exile Alchemist's Gambit. Cleave is supposed to get rid of that you lose the game bit at the end of it, but we don't want to necessarily get rid of that, because all we can do is pay 1 red and then end the turn, and we don't even have to wait for it to be the end step, because it says at the beginning of that turn's end step, you lose the game. It'll never trigger. You skipped the at the beginning part, you go straight to cleanup. As long as you end the turn that turn, you're fine and you don't lose the game. This is the thing that your opponents see this and they smell blood in the water. If you throw this out there, you better be prepared to back it up, because there is nothing they would love more than for you to die to this card. So let's try and protect ourselves, shall we? Nothing to me is more fun than to cancel somebody's spell because you just decided, I don't want you to do it right now. Dream's Grip is fun. For 1 blue, it's an instant with tap target permanent or untap target permanent. And Entwine 1. Entwine meaning if you can pay the 1 mana on top of the additional blue you spent, you can do both of those. And to be really honest, tapping a permanent and untapping a permanent is really helpful. With Obeka, we mostly want to untap a permanent. And all we have to do is pay a blue and then untap her. So what would happen is, say we're about to lose the game because of Alchemist's Gambit, and we want to tap Obeka to end the turn. I would say, yeah, I'd like to end the turn, but your opponents might not want you to, and so they could counter that ability, or they could affect that ability. Let's say you activate your commander and a disallow hits. Well, now your ability's countered, and you can't necessarily just say, oh, I'm going to end the turn. Response, pay you the 1 mana for Dream's Grip, and then untap your commander, and then tap it again once it resolves to once again end the turn, meaning you will exile the disallow that's on the stack, and you will never have to see that again. Most of our protection is going to come from cards that just untap our commander, because we want to make sure that we don't lose our value on our turn. We want to make sure that the opponents have zero say in what we're going to do with our turn. We can also use it as a little bit of a tool to make sure that the big threat doesn't attack us. So if you have somebody pulling down a big beater that's constantly coming in for damage, and so the next time they pull down a big creature and they're about to go to combat, you can always ask them, is that going to be swinging at me? And if they're iffy about it, or they're just like, well, I guess you'll find out, well, tap it down. Let them figure it out themselves, because if they're going to be a little bit coy about it, you might as well make it so that they don't have a choice. And they're just going to be like, oh, what's he going to attack you? Should have said that. I wouldn't have tapped it down. Our land ramp is going to be few and far between in this deck. We're going to mostly be focusing on artifact ramp, but for some land ramp, we do have things like Surveyor's Scope. For 2, you get an artifact with tap, exile Surveyor's Scope, search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of players who control at least 2 more lands than you, put those onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. That's going to help you get a lot of lands, especially if you're way behind, because a lot of times you're not going to get a lot of lands in this deck. Traveler's Amulet will let you just consistently hit your land drops, so we want to make sure that not necessarily filter them out, but get them so that we can at least play with some lands, and then fix your colors while you're at it. Wayfarer's Bauble is just going to be regular land ramp. We can go ahead and get that land turn 2. Fire Diamond, pretty simple. Pay 2, enters tapped, it can tap for a red. And then Gem of Becoming, 3-drop for an artifact where you can pay 3, tap, and sack it. Search your library for an island, a swamp, and a mountain. Just those types. You don't need to get basics. You reveal them, put them into your hand, and shuffle your library. And then finally, we're going to go through our lands. We're going to hit Evolving Wilds, and I'm not going to explain too much into what they do, because you can pause it and read it if you need to. Evolving Wilds just gets you a basic land of any type, enters tapped to feel the ruin. It can tap for 1, and then you can pay 2 to tap it and sack it to destroy target non-basic land, and everybody gets to search for a basic. Floodplain enters the battlefield tapped, and then you can tap it, sack it to search for an island or a plains. You get Geothermal Bog, Mountain, Swamp, so you enters the battlefield tapped, but it can tap for a black or a red. It can help with that things like Gem of Becoming. Grixis Panorama taps for a colorless, otherwise you can pay 1 to sack it, search for a basic island, swamp, or mountain card, put it onto the battlefield, tapped, and shuffle. It gets you with the mana fixing, so you don't have to worry too much about it. Again, this doesn't have a lot of mana ramp, so a lot of what you're going to see is mana fixing and just trying to keep on curve with lands. Ice Tunnel is going to be a snow land, island, swamp that will just tap for a blue or a black. Mad Blind Mountain, it's a land that is a mountain, and also for a red, you can tap and shuffle your library, just if you have 2 or more red permanents. A lot of times you'll be able to get that because your commander counts as one of them. Just get another one. Molten Tributary is an island mountain, so it taps for a blue and a red. Mooring Island, just like we had with the Mad Blind Mountain, it's an island. You can pay a blue, look at the top card of target player's library, pay this ability if you control 2 more blue permanents. Smoldering Marsh, one of the better ones. It enters tapped unless you control 2 more basic lands. Later in the game this becomes better, but this one is a swamp mountain, so it taps for a black or a red. Sulphurous Mire, it's a snow land, swamp mountain, taps, black, red. Sunken Hollow, island, swamp, Temple of Deceit. This one is not any of those types, but it does still tap for a blue or a black. It just enters tapped, and when it does enter the battlefield, you scramble. And then Temple of Epiphany, same thing as Temple of Deceit, but this one taps for a blue or red. We also have Terramorphic Expanse, just like Evolving Wilds. Search your library for any basic land, put it on tap, shuffle the library, and then Volatile Fjord. It is a island mountain that enters the battlefield tapped, so it can tap for either of those. Final few lands, you're looking 5 swamps, 7 mountains, 8 islands. A lot of these effects are going to say at end of combat or at the beginning of the next end step. Other cards I'd look out for are the ones that say at the end of your turn, because if you're just to skip past at combat and get those Myriad triggers off, the end of your turn would only trigger if it hits that trigger at the end of your turn. So when you tap Obeka, she'll just go straight to cleanup, and that'll never trigger. Next time it has a chance is on the end step of your next turn. So you could probably use those a little bit to kind of skirt around some interesting effects. I know there's some that lets you draw extra cards, but you gotta discard your hand at end of turn. So those types of things you want to make sure that you can find, but keep an eye out for wording depending on what you're recommending, because this can be tricky, but it's also really fun to find something that actually does work. So go ahead and let me know what you think of this deck in the comments. I've spent a lot of time trying to get this deck to work. It's been a little clunky to start, but I do feel that this gets super powerful, and then once it hits its correct way, you are doing nothing but putting down the law, because this is something that I had to dig really deep into the rules lorry text for, so a lot of the times it just feels like I became a judge. And hey, if your budget isn't going to be 50 cents or less per card, throw whatever you want in there. There's a bunch of cards that are going to be really fun for you, and a lot of them can help, especially with Myriad. So go ahead and find out what you like in this deck, and let me know what you'd change yourself. My name has been Cody, this is Power Budget TCG, and I'll see you later. Peace out. Yeah? Yeah? You can always just go here. It's a good video, just saying, if you like this one, you probably like that one.